Hello dear viewer of my channel. Emily is with you. For the most interesting stories, watch the video until the end. Subscribe and like the video, I will be very pleased. I love you all.
Story time about how I hooked up with my boyfriend's dad. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend's dad is an absolute DILF. He used to be a competitive bodybuilder and even did some modeling back in the day. Well, let's just say my boyfriend didn't turn out with the same looks. Don't get me wrong, my boyfriend is really sweet, but he's not the best looking guy. One of the reasons we started dating and I really liked him was because of how considerate and loving he was. We started off as friends and he would take me out to dinner, wine and dine me, eventually asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. We both come from wealthy families, and our families loved the idea of us being together. Exactly a year ago, we moved in together, and he got a new job that required him to travel a lot. Well, he asked his dad to come check on me. So his dad would come over, we would watch movies, and just hang out. But one night we decided to do some drinking. I got super tipsy, and so did he. One thing led to another, and we ended up, And after that, we did it over and over. Of course, my boyfriend's dad felt super guilty, and so did I. I mean, he was cheating on his wife with me, and I was cheating on his son with him. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I hooked up with my boyfriend's dad. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After my boyfriend's dad and I had hooked up a couple of times, of course, he felt really guilty, and so did I. We decided to end things cordially and never tell anyone about it. Fast forward to when my boyfriend comes home from his work trip. I had to pretend like nothing happened, but it was really hard because at this point I definitely caught feelings for my boyfriend's dad. I became really distant from my boyfriend and he started noticing. He also asked me one day if his dad came over to check up on me, which I said yes. After that, things were just not the same between my boyfriend and I. He would always ask me why I never touched him or kissed him, and I would just say that I felt bad or that I had my period. A month later, my boyfriend goes on another work trip. My boyfriend even invited me to come on the work trip, but I said no. Instead, as soon as he left, I called his dad and told him to come over. I told him I just wanted to talk, but really, His dad came over, we talked for about an hour, and then it happened again. It's like we just couldn't help ourselves. That's when he told me that he was catching feelings for me and that maybe even wanted to get a divorce. Part 3 is Part 3 of how I hooked up with my boyfriend's dad. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend's dad tells me that he wants to get a divorce from his wife because he's catching feelings for me. He even suggested that we could move away to another town. And yes, at this point, I had totally fallen for him too. But at the same time, I still had a relationship with his son. But to be honest with you guys, I didn't have the guts to tell my boyfriend that I loved his dad. Since my boyfriend was still on the work trip, his dad would come over almost every single day. His wife, aka my mother-in-law, didn't even notice that she was coming over to my place. She thought he was at work and at the gym. We are now fully in love. My boyfriend came back from his work trip and of course, I was still distant. A few days later, he asked me what was wrong and I just don't know what to tell him. His dad told me to keep quiet for now because he wants to figure out what to do. I don't want to end a marriage and I know I don't want to break my boyfriend's heart. But at the same time, I am in love with his dad. I know you guys are going to think I'm a terrible person, but I genuinely need your advice. What do you guys think I should do? Should I be honest with my boyfriend? Part 3 of how I got catfished for 3 years. Claim this is not my story time. It's sent to me on Instagram. So I sent him $3,000. A few hours later, I get an angry message from him saying that I should have sent more money. He even called me the B word. I was super heartbroken because I couldn't believe he was talking to me like that. So like an idiot, I apologized and sent $2,000 more. So in total, I'd given him $5,000. I asked him again what he needed the money for, and he said that his money was tied up in investments. A few days later, he apologized and told me the money came through. Before I knew it, almost 3 years had passed. He kept using COVID as an excuse not to be able to travel to see me. And yes, he did ask me for more money, so in total I had sent him about $20,000. A month ago, I told him that for my birthday, I wanted to go see him. That's when he sent me a message saying that I was too much and he couldn't handle the relationship anymore. I called him again and the same weird voice answered. That's when he told me that he had been lying to me this whole time, and he was actually a 70-year-old French man. He told me to leave him alone and hung up. I'm totally heartbroken, and I have no way of getting that money back. What should I do? Embarrassing story time about how I was catfished for 3 years. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I'm a super shy person. I have such a hard time talking to guys. So one day my friend suggested I do online dating. So I went home and I signed up to a bunch of dating apps. This is when I started meeting a bunch of guys online. And it was much easier to speak to them through there than in person. So one day I get a message from this really cute guy. He asked me for my Instagram and we started messaging each other through there. His profile was full of pictures of him traveling with his dog and his family. He had a Range Rover and even said he was a doctor. Like literally my dream man. After a few weeks, I was completely head over heels in love. And he told me he felt the same way. But we had never even had a phone conversation. That's when I asked him if we could talk on the phone. He told me he was in surgeries all day, so we would have to reschedule. I believed it. He then ghosted me for a full week. When he came back, he apologized and said he's been really busy. So I decided to call him. And you won't believe what happened next. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I got catfished for 3 years. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 1, he ghosted me for a full week. When he came back, he said he was just busy. So I called him, and a man with a strange accent answered on the other side. He told me that my boyfriend left his phone in the bathroom and that he happened to find it. And I believed it. A few hours later, I get a message from my online boyfriend saying that he's sorry he missed my call. He said he was really busy for the rest of the week, so he wouldn't be able to talk on the phone. I was so in love that I just believed everything he said, which I know is so stupid. After that, we just messaged each other through WhatsApp for months. Then I asked him to send me some pictures, and he basically sent me screenshots of his Instagram pictures. So I asked him to send me a selfie. Obviously, I wasn't suspecting anything, but I just wanted to see his face. So he sent me a really bad quality picture, and I couldn't really even make out the face. That's when he said the camera on his phone wasn't working, which is why he sent me screenshots of Instagram. Again, I believed it. A few days later, he asked me for money, and when I asked him why, he said he was short on funds. So I sent him $3,000. Then he sent a really angry message saying I should have sent more. Part 3 is up. Story time about how I'm hopelessly in love with my boss and I'm about to be a homewrecker, but help me! Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So I've been working for my boss for 3 months. He's in the tech world and he makes lots of money, and he hired me as a personal assistant. He's got a wife and 3 kids. They've been married for 15 years, and he's 18 years older than I am. One day my friend told me that this guy was looking for a personal assistant, and I applied for the job. I had my first interview, and right away I was super attracted to him, and I could tell that he was attracted to me. Like, you know, when you like someone and, you know, there's just a vibe between you guys. He then called me in for a second interview, and in this interview, we basically spoke about everything he would want me to do and what the job entailed. I mostly had to run his schedule and set up meetings for him with clients and different things like that. So it's not like I was getting him his laundry or running errands for him. A few days later, he calls me and tells me that I got the job. He offered me a lot of money, more than it was advertised at the beginning when I went for the interview. So I took the job. But here's the thing. From the time I did my first interview, I had not stopped thinking about this man. Like, I already had feelings for him before I even started working for him. So I decided to dress really cute for my first day, and he noticed. I mean, I was playing this man like a fiddle. My goal was to get him to fall for me. After the first week, he asked me to go to lunch with him to celebrate the fact that I had been doing a good job. Of course, I said yes. Went to this beautiful restaurant and had wine. We then went back to his office and I went home. Later on, he sends me a text message saying that he's so proud of me for doing such a good job. Fast forward a few weeks, I kept flirting, he kept flirting back. Finally, at the end of the month, we went to another lunch. This is when he opened up to me and told me that he was attracted to me. I told him I was attracted to him too. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm hopelessly in love with my boss and I'm about to be a homewrecker, so I need your guys' help. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After my first month of working there, he took me out to lunch and decided to tell me that he was attracted to me. So of course I confessed to him that I was attracted to him as well. I mean, duh, it was so obvious. At this point, I had done everything in my power to make him fall in love with me. I wore the cutest outfits, always did my hair and makeup. If I went to Starbucks, I would always get him a drink as well. And I would even bring him home-cooked meals sometimes. So in other words, I went out of my way to make him see that I am totally wifey material. And yes, I was always aware that he was married and had kids, but he didn't look happy with his wife. She never came to the office, and they never spent any time together. And according to him, she had an affair last year, and he's pretty sure that she's back with the guy that she was having an affair with. First, I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but then he showed me screenshots of messages that she had sent to this guy. That's when he asked me if I wanted to go have lunch again. Then he asked me to go to the movies, and we made out the entire time. So I'm sitting there making out with my boss. That's when he tells me that we have to keep this hush-hush, because if the company finds out, he will be in major trouble and so will I. But he's a high earner in the company, so he can't be messing around. This would ruin his life. Ever since the first kiss, he basically treats me like his work girlfriend. And every day for lunch, we go out to a restaurant just to get to know each other. It's the only time we have together. About a week ago, he asked me if I would be willing to marry him if he divorced his wife. I said yes right away, but honestly, I'm not sure if I want him to leave his wife for me. And his kids. I never thought of myself as a homewrecker. Well, because I said yes, he said that we should try to find a way to tell his wife. I mean, I don't even want to meet this woman. And he wants both of us to talk to her. I told him we should wait at least a few months before we do that. That's when he got me a new apartment. That way, when he leaves his wife, he's already got a place to stay. And of course, he wants to live with me right away. It's a luxury apartment and I love it. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I'm hopelessly in love with my boss and I'm about to be a homewrecker. So yes, I need your guys' help. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So now that he got me my new luxury apartment, which I'm totally in love with. By the way, I have a sauna in my shower. He wants us to plan out how we're gonna tell his wife. Like I said in part 2, I don't know if I want him to leave his wife for me. I mean, I see a future with him, but do I really want him to leave his wife and his kids for me? He even wants to start planning the wedding. He wants to move in together right away, plan the wedding, and get married. He promises me that his kids will love me and that his wife won't have a problem because she's already having an affair with someone else. But I feel like that's just him being hopeful and it's really not going to be that easy. So I opened up to my family and I told them what's going on. My mom told me that as long as he leaves his wife and everything is good with the kids, then we should feel free to be together. But ultimately, she doesn't want me to be a homewrecker. I definitely feel like things are going way too fast. I mean, tomorrow we're gonna go taste a bunch of cakes at a really nice bakery. Oh yeah, and he even took me shopping for a wedding ring. He wants to buy me one that's $40,000. It's 3.2 carats. So unfortunately, now that I told my family, a few cousins found out what was happening. And one of my cousins reached out to my ex. She told him what was happening and he called me to ask me not to marry this guy. He says we can work on our relationship. But let me tell you, this ex was totally toxic. He would monitor everything I would do. He never let me have friends, and he didn't even allow me to have Instagram. Oh yeah, and he's kind of broke. I mean, I was the one paying for most of the stuff in the relationship, so I don't even know if I want to open that can of worms again. But part of me thinks he's right. Like, I shouldn't be rushing into this. But on the other hand, I found myself a wonderful man. He's so loving, caring, so generous, and he's actually super fun to be with too. I've never felt more secure in a relationship before, and I know that most women would love to be with him too. What do you guys think I should do? Part 4 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, and stole all of his money. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said, my sugar daddy was starting to get really annoyed at me because I never spent enough time with him. That's when I broke it to him that I was actually married. He totally flipped out, called me a user, cut me off, and blocked me from everything. So that meant I was not getting money from this sugar daddy at all. It meant I was totally dependent on my husband. Remember I said my husband wanted me to get pregnant? Well, I kept taking the pill because I didn't want to get pregnant. But my husband would ask me every single day how that was going. And I was like, it's going. I even started lying, saying that I was going to go to the baby doctor just to get myself checked, and I really wouldn't. Instead, I would go have lunch and shop. Around this time, an old sugar daddy of mine contacted me, who I still had a crush on. He was like super good looking. He offered me some money and asked me if I wanted to go on a few dates, so of course I said yes. I accepted because I really wanted to just separate myself financially from my husband. I didn't want to be dependent on him all the time. So when my husband was at work, I would go out on dates with this new sugar daddy. The sugar daddy wanted me to go on a trip with him, and I had to say no. He got really upset and started asking questions. Of course, I didn't tell him that I was married, but he started getting really suspicious. He also started to catch feelings really quick. Like, he always wanted to be with me. He would text me all the time. And that's when my husband finds a text message from the sugar daddy. I basically denied everything and I told him that I no longer had any sugar daddies, but my husband did not believe me. That's when he calls my sugar daddy from my phone and tells him to leave me alone. And the sugar daddy told him that only I could make that decision. So I basically had to cut off the sugar daddy right in front of my husband. My husband was like really angry at this time. So I was on my best behavior for the next few weeks. But after a few weeks, he was still really angry. So I realized I needed to start taking money out of the account that he gave me. So I started transferring money from his account to my account. And then from my account to another account at a different bank. And guess what? My husband did not notice one bit. He had several other accounts and investments and all this other stuff, so he never really noticed if anything went missing from that one account. After a few months, I had $50,000 in that bank account. I knew it wasn't enough, so I had to start taking more money out. And then a few months after that, I was at $120,000. I knew this was enough to get me a little house somewhere and just like basically live by myself. That's when I devised a whole plan. I would leave the country and buy myself a house. I even started looking for a real estate agent in other countries. But then the poo hit the fan. My husband found my pills and asked me if I was actually trying to get pregnant or not. Once again, I started lying and I told him that of course I wanted to have a baby with him. Then he insisted we go to the doctor together. That's when he found out that I had not gone to the doctor once. He told me that if I didn't want kids, we would have to get a divorce, so I told him that I didn't want kids. That's when I told him I wanted a divorce and that I only wanted half of his stuff. He started laughing in my face and left. I knew I had to act quick because it was a matter of time before he found out I stole all that money. The very next day, I booked a flight and left. He started blowing up my phone, asking me where I was, calling me. Then he started threatening me for taking all the money in the bank account and that he hired private investigators to find me. Now I'm considering going back to him, but I honestly don't know what to do. I got myself a cute little house and even found a new sugar daddy. But I know he's still looking for me. What should I do, you guys? I think I really messed up, you guys. Part 2 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, oh yeah, and stole all of his money. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. This was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 1, I had asked him for an allowance. Of course he said yes and offered me $3,000 a month. I accepted even though it was on the low end. By the way, I still had one sugar daddy at this time. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I was pretty obsessed with the Kardashians. My goal in life is to look like Kim K. So now that I had a plastic surgeon boyfriend, I decided to ask him what other surgeries he thinks I could do. I already had my nose job. Now I definitely wanted to do some other stuff on my body. But when I told him, he got really upset. He said I didn't need to change anything about me and that I needed to stop looking for attention from other men. That's when I told him that would be totally impossible and that I definitely was going to keep my other sugar daddy. He totally flips out because he didn't know I had a sugar daddy. Then he asked me if I was actually in love with him. I told him that love would grow eventually, but that I really did like him. Then he started playing hard to get, like he wanted me to apologize and beg him, but I was not the type. So we ended up not speaking for a few weeks. Eventually he comes over to my apartment and asks me what surgeries I want to get done. And back to the surgery table I went. Part 3 is up. Part 3 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, oh yeah, and stole all of his money. Well, almost all of it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. But my plastic surgeon boyfriend decides to do more plastic surgery on me. But this time, it was free. We decided to get my bum done. Again, during the healing process, he was a total angel and brought me food and took care of me. Yeah, he was also paying for all of my bills and my rent at this time, even though I still had a sugar daddy. And he knew it. A few months passed and he asked me to go to Italy with him. Of course I said yes. We stayed at a beautiful place in Tuscany and then he asked me to marry him. He had planned out this whole romantic dinner and of course I had to say yes. But on one condition, that I let go of my last sugar daddy. So I told him I would, although I actually did not. So we started planning my dream wedding. We finally got married and I moved into his mansion. Then he told me that I had to get pregnant right away. His excuse is that he's in his 50s and he really wants to have kids. I said I wanted to have a baby too, but I kept taking the pill. I mean, I am just not ready to have kids or to ruin my beautiful body. This is when my other sugar daddy started getting really annoyed because I never spent time with him. It was really hard being torn between two men. Part 4 is up. Story time about how I got bullied my last year of high school by the most popular girl. Okay, so this is my story time. A lot of you requested one, but I'm also at the airport, so sorry for any noise. So most of my high school years were spent in Nicaragua, except for my last year of high school. You see, I booked a show in Miami, so I had to move to the US. I was also doing modeling, commercials, and a lot of radio. I enrolled in the local high school and it was like literally culture shock for me. I had never experienced an American high school, American parties, or even like actually mingled with American kids. I was really shocked to see how like adult they were. For example, boys and girls were doing adult things. I was constantly being invited to parties where people were drinking, but I never actually went. So the most popular girl in school decided to befriend me in quotation marks. By the way, there were so many times where I spent lunch in the bathroom like Caddy from Mean Girls. It was like Mean Girls, but real life. So this popular girl, she was also a model, and we kind of bonded over that. But behind my back, she had a bet to see which boy would take me to prom. She wanted to see how far this boy could get with me, if you know what I mean. Part 2 might not be up, sorry. Part 2 of how I got bullied by the most popular girl in school. This is my story time. So this popular girl who befriended me had a bet with boys to see which one would take me to prom. Specifically because she wanted to see how far they would get with me on prom night, if you know what I mean. I kept saying no to every single boy. Because I was the new girl, I was constantly getting hit on, but a lot of these boys had girlfriends. Well, since I said no to every single boy, this mean girl decided to print out flyers of the show that I was in. So basically the poster of the show. And when I got to school the next day, there were so many posters of me on the walls, on the floor, with a lot of things drawn on my face. They were even in the boys' locker room. Then someone made up the rumor that I did that, because supposedly I wanted everyone to know that I was a working actress. I was really embarrassed, but at the same time, I kind of thought it was funny. And this really upset the popular girl. So she decided to take it a step further. She invited me to her house one day, and because I thought she was my friend, I decided to go. She cooked me pasta and we talked for a while. Then 2 boys show up. She told me one of them would be my prom date. Part 3 of how I got bullied by the most popular girl in school. This is my story, by the way. So I'm at the popular girl's house, and suddenly 2 boys show up and she says one of them was my date. That's when I told her that I did not want a date for prom. And then the boy asked to speak to me. I talked to him and I told him that I definitely did not want to go on a date with him and that I didn't even know him. That's when he told me that my friend had set everything up, and she told him that I liked him a lot. Well, I told him that that was not true and I basically went home. A few days later, she started a rumor saying that I was totally in love with her and that I forced her to kiss me. Yeah, she's crazy. That's when people started calling me horrible names. But the joke's on her because I was so used to getting bullied in Nicaragua. After school one day, she comes up to me and starts telling me why she doesn't like me. She was so angry she started to cry. She said that she was the pretty girl and then she was the model in school. I literally just walked away from her. I went to prom with no date, which was so fun. I graduated and then I kept working. Guess who slid into my DMs a few weeks ago asking to hang out? That's right, the popular girl. I think she must have seen my TikTok or something. Should I actually go out with her and tell her what I think? Or should I just leave her on red? You guys decide. Part 2 of how my boyfriend broke up with me to marry my mother. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 1, we moved into my mom's house and she was wearing lingerie all the time. And she would constantly flirt with my boyfriend. My boyfriend was having a really hard time finding a job, but luckily I found a job. So I started working as a personal assistant. The problem is that as a personal assistant, you have to be on call almost 24/7. So I was usually never home, and sometimes when I would get home, I'd have to go right back out. This allowed for my mom and my boyfriend to spend a lot of time together by themselves. I would come home and they would be watching movies on the couch together. My mom would always cook him dinner. And then I started finding out stuff. For example, I found out they went to the movies together and they didn't invite me. I only found out because my boyfriend used our joint bank account to pay for the tickets. Sometimes they would order food for themselves and not even offer me any. And they would have beach days. They were spending way too much time together. At first I thought this was good because it meant they got along, but the more my mom dressed provocatively, the more I realized she was trying to seduce him. Then my boyfriend breaks up with me and tells me that I should move out because him and my mom fell in love. Story time about how my boyfriend broke up with me to marry my mother. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Yes, my boyfriend actually did marry my mom. A little backstory on him. He and I had been dating for 6 months. We decided we wanted to move in together, but neither of us had a job. So we ended up moving in with my mother. A little backstory on my mom. Her and I never got along when I was growing up. I mean, it would get to the point where we would throw hands. Every single week she had a new boyfriend. Most of the time her boyfriends would come live with us and she would pay for everything. She even asked me to get a job so that I could help support her and her boyfriend. I started working at a restaurant. And yeah, I helped her pay for bills. I would even buy her boyfriend his beer. When I got accepted into college, I decided I would move out. After that, I barely spoke to my mom. Fast forward to when my boyfriend and I move in with her. She would wear lingerie around the house and constantly flirt with my boyfriend. I had to tell her on several occasions to cover up and just leave him alone. But here's the thing, it never bothered my boyfriend. In fact, he would flirt back. I thought he was just joking. Until a few months passed and he breaks up with me. Part 2 is up. Part 3 of how my boyfriend broke up with me to marry my mother. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So one day my boyfriend breaks up with me and tells me that I should move out. When I asked him why, he said that him and my mother fell in love. But since I was already suspecting something, it didn't really surprise me. But of course I was still devastated. That's when he asked me if I could move out that same night. Mind you, I don't have any money or even a place to go to. That's when I run over to my mom's room and guess what? She had locked herself inside. The coward didn't even want to face her own daughter. She told me that the best thing for everyone was for me to move out and that she knew I could get back up on my feet. So I grabbed some of my stuff and I went over to my best friend's house. My best friend invited me to live with her, thank God. A few weeks later, my mom invites me to her wedding with my boyfriend. Or ex, I should say. Last I heard, she's doing OnlyFans, and my ex is living off of her. I have a better job, I'm thriving, and have my own apartment. Story time about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. My husband actually cheated on his wife with me. I started working at his company when I was 18. We started an affair and I knew it was wrong, but at the time I was very broke. He offered me a wealthy lifestyle and believe it or not, we fell in love. So when he and I got married, I was still 18. He was much older than me, he was 42. Everyone in town, of course, started hating me because I broke up the family. His wife couldn't even see my face. My husband already had 2 kids when we got married. One was 12, one was 15. So they were much closer in age to me than he was. The kids and I got along super well. I was their cool stepmom and we had a lot of fun. When I turned 20, the oldest boy came to live with us. And I think you already know what happens. My husband was always traveling for work. That means my stepson and I would be home alone most of the time. One night we decided to watch a movie and before I knew it, we were making out on the couch. From then, we basically started an affair behind my husband's back. Part 2 is up. Part 2 about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said, my husband was always traveling for work. So my stepson and I would be alone in the house a lot. One night we were watching a movie and it just happened. After that, we couldn't get enough of each other. He even started skipping class so that he could spend more time with me. We basically turned into boyfriend and girlfriend when my husband wasn't there. When my husband would come home from his work trips, we would pretend like everything was normal. One day after my husband got back from one of his work trips, he found one of his son's socks in our bed. He asked me how it got there, but I told him it probably got stuck in there while I was washing the sheets. A few months passed by and my stepson and I are still hooking up. This is when I realized that I hadn't gotten my period in a few months. My period was always irregular, so I didn't think anything of it. My stepson went to the pharmacy to get me a pregnancy test. It came out positive. But the big problem is that my husband can't have children anymore. How was I going to explain this to my husband when he couldn't have kids? Part 3 is up. Part 3 about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My stepson and I take the pregnancy test and it turns out it was positive. Well, I told my stepson that his dad wasn't able to have kids anymore. That's when he really flipped out. Then he tells me we should just tell his dad the truth. I told him let's not do anything until we actually confirm that I'm pregnant. We go to the doctor the next day and it turns out I'm not pregnant. But this made me realize that we needed to end the affair. Once we got home, I told him we needed to break things off. He begged me not to and we went to his bedroom. Not even 2 minutes later, his mother walks in. She catches us on his bed. She nearly has a heart attack, calls his dad and tells him everything. She took him out of the house and told me never to see him again. When my husband came back from his trip, he made me promise not to see my stepson again. I told him we should get a divorce, but he said no. Then he confessed to me that he's been having an affair too. Now he doesn't even let me leave the house anymore. I want a divorce. What should I do? Story time about how my dad shot my abusive husband. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My husband and I met through some friends, but I never thought he was attractive or even interesting. But then I heard from other people that he would comment about how beautiful I was, and that's when he started asking me out. I kept saying no because I just didn't like him. But then he reached out to my cousin and asked her to convince me to go out with him. My cousin and I are super close and I always trusted her judgment. So I finally said yes to one date. I was in nursing school at the time, so I was really busy and actually really broke. So he paid for dinner and he even offered to help me pay my bills. I couldn't believe he was being so generous, but obviously at the time I didn't realize that he was just trying to control me. Here's where it gets really scary. 2 months later, he actually took me out on a date. And it was our wedding. That's right, he planned a whole wedding, got my parents' permission and everything. I show up to this date thinking we were gonna have dinner, but then he put me in a freaking wedding gown. I felt like I had no other choice, so I said yes. 2 weeks after we got married, he completely changed. He was totally abusive. He started brainwashing me to not even see my family. Part 2 is up. After my husband forced me into marrying him, he became a totally different person. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. He started brainwashing me into believing that I could never leave him, and that no one could ever love me, and he even started convincing me that my family hated me. It was just his way to keep me away from them. But my entire family had enough, especially my dad. My dad was a cop and he had dealt with a lot of abusive husbands in the past. So one night my dad comes to our very big, very beautiful house, and he asked my husband to let me go. That's when my husband grabs a bat from behind the door and starts swinging at my dad. My dad, being a cop, had his gun on him. He pulled it out and shot him in the you-know-what. That's when he looked at me and said that he would kill me if I left. Part 3 is up. My dad pulls his gun out and shoots my husband in the you-know-what. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. My husband falls to the ground, looks at me and says that if I leave the house, he would kill me. But of course, I ran straight to my dad and we went home. My dad called an ambulance and they went to get my husband. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I never went to visit him once. I was so grateful to my dad for getting me out of that abusive relationship. But guess what? The abuse hasn't ended. My husband is suing me for abandonment. He's got his lawyers visiting me every single day, harassing me. I've noticed one man who keeps following me, and my car was broken into 2 nights ago. There's so much more, I think I'll have to make a follow-up story time. My dad is doing everything possible to get the divorce, and we're also trying to get a restraining order against my husband. I actually recently found pictures that I had taken of my bruises, so now I've got proof. Should I do a part 4? Story time about how I caught my husband with his best friend in bed. Who, by the way, is a guy. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. I knew that my husband was bi before we got married and it never bothered me. In fact, that's how we met. A few years ago, I was dating this guy, and we had an open relationship, and he would tell me about this other guy that he was hooking up with. Well, he introduced me to his male friend, and we actually ended up hooking up. A few months later, we became boyfriend and girlfriend, and a few years later, we got married. So I always knew my husband was bi. Here's when his best friend comes into the picture. Let's call him Kenny. Kenny's been best friends with my husband for over 7 years. They've known each other longer than I've known my husband. But get this, Kenny is also married. Kenny would sometimes sleep over our house when it was really late. A few weeks ago, he slept over. I went to bed, but at 4 in the morning, I wake up and my husband is not in bed. So I go looking for him and I hear a noise coming from the guest bedroom. I walk in and see that my husband is tied to the bed. Guess what they were doing? Part 2 is up. See, my husband is tied to the bed and his best friend Kenny is doing things to him. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. I was so shocked I ran to the toilet and vomited. Kenny went straight to put on his clothes, but my husband was still tied to the damn bed. Before Kenny could start untying him, I straight up started punching my husband in the face, the chest, the neck. I felt uncontrollable rage for the first time. This whole time that I thought they were just best friends, my husband and his male best friend Kenny are hooking up behind my back. Here's when I really started to lose control. Kenny tried to pull me off of my husband, so I noticed that they had a bunch of candles lit. So I grabbed 2 candles and threw them straight at Kenny's head. One of them missed, but the other one got him. So Kenny grabbed his phone and started calling 911. Mind you, my husband is still tied to the bed at this point. Then I grabbed another candle and poured all the hot wax on top of my husband's you-know-what. Part 3 is up. My husband is tied to the bed, so I grabbed the candle and poured all the hot wax on his you-know-what. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. Kenny has already called the police at this point and they are on their way. I'm still in blind rage and my husband is still tied to the bed. That's when Kenny grabs me by the hair, takes me to the bathroom and throws me into the tub. I landed on my arm and actually broke it. He goes to untie my husband and that's when the police knock on the door. Well, guess what? They arrested me for assaulting my husband. I sat in a jail cell for 6 hours before my husband came to bail me out. Of course, he apologized and said he would drop the charges. Apparently, Kenny asked his wife for a divorce and is demanding that my husband and I get divorced because he wants to be with my husband. My husband basically said that he doesn't know who to choose, me or him. I really do love my husband. What do I do? So I show my ex the fake pregnancy test so that he can marry me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. Mind you, his ex is sitting on the couch waiting for him to come back so that they can finish watching their stupid movie. And when he saw that the test was positive, he started to cry. I told him that we had to talk, and he told his ex to leave. Then he tells his parents to come into the room, and his mom also started to cry when she saw the pregnancy test. I couldn't really tell if they were happy tears or if they were like, oh no tears. That's when I told him that I fully expected him to ask me to marry him. I even told him that I was 2 months along so we could start planning the wedding. That's when he told his parents that I was right. Then he asked me to marry him. I knew that I got what I wanted, but I had no idea how I was going to fake this pregnancy. A few days later, he moved back into our apartment. He started painting the guest room so that it could be the nursery. But here's the worst part. A month later, I was still not able to get pregnant. I didn't know what to do, so I started eating a lot of food to fake the pregnancy bump. I would eat McDonald's for breakfast and Taco Bell for dinner. Part 3 is up. In order to fake the pregnancy, I had to gain weight. So I started eating tons of food. I would have pizza every other day. I ate 2 pints of ice cream a day. And every time I passed by a fast food place, I would pick up something to eat. I was gaining a little bit of weight, so people believed me when I said I was pregnant. Finally, the wedding came around. I was so relieved once we were married because I knew I had to eventually go to the doctor. And I had decided that once the doctor said that I wasn't pregnant, I would put on a show and pretend that I just lost the baby. Well, when it finally happened, my husband straight up asked me if I made it all up. And I told him yes. It literally took him 1 hour to move out of the apartment. He went straight to get a restraining order, and my parents sent me to a psychiatrist. But you see, we're still married. He hasn't filed for divorce, so I think I should reach out to him. I know he and I will end up together. What do you guys think? Story time about how I tricked my ex into paying for all of my plastic surgery. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. A little backstory. I met my ex at the gym. He was actually my personal trainer. He was in really good shape while I was definitely out of shape and pudgy. He motivated me to work out and lose weight. I quickly realized I had a major crush on him. So after a full year of training, I had lost about 30 pounds. I felt really good about myself. So I mustered up the courage to tell him that I had a crush on him. But unfortunately, he told me that he never dated clients. Then he said that we still had a lot of work to do on my body anyway. It was a punch to the gut. I decided I needed to get a new trainer because of what he said and because obviously I had a crush on him. Well, it just so happens that I landed in my dream job. I started making a lot of money. He followed me on Instagram and he started noticing it. I moved into a better apartment and I got a new car. I also got lip filler and cheek filler. That's when he calls me up and asks me on a date. I said yes right away. You'll never guess what happened next. Part 2 is up. Once he saw I had money, he asked me out on a date. I had been crushing on him for more than a year, so I said yes. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. We set up a date and it went really well. He paid for dinner and congratulated me on all my success. After that, we started hanging out almost every single weekend. And about a month later, he asked me to be his girlfriend and I was so happy. I had my dream job, I lost weight, I looked damn good. And I got the perfect boyfriend too. But this is when he got toxic. He would start to criticize little things about my body. For example, I had a little bit of fat on my stomach and he would point that out. Or he would point out that my boobs weren't that big. And like I said in part 1, he was a trainer, so he had abs. Made me feel self-conscious, so I never got undressed in front of him. Then one day he suggested I go to a plastic surgeon. He even looked up a few in my area. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend actually suggested I go to a plastic surgeon because he didn't like that my boobs were small and that I had a bit of a tummy. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I got extremely offended, of course. Then he acted like what he said was completely normal. I told him that I love my body as it was. Then he said that I still needed to do a lot of work on it. Then he insinuated that his girlfriend needs to look just as good as he does. In other words, he thought he was better looking than me. So I thought to myself, okay, sure. Let's go to this plastic surgeon. But I was gonna find a way to make him pay for it. You see, at this point I was paying for a lot. I would pay for our dates and dinners. He would even sometimes ask me for gas money. We went to the plastic surgeon and I decided to get my boobies done. So I told my boyfriend that all my money was tied up in investments, that I needed him to loan me the money. He said, yeah, sure, and he transferred the money. I got the plastic surgery and it looks amazing. I've since moved to another city, blocked him on my phone and on social media, and he hasn't been able to find me. I mean, I think he kind of deserved it, but I also feel guilty. What should I do?